Welcome to my thought for the day for Monday, the 4th of April 2022. Today's lectionary reading is from Hebrews 11, verses 17 to 31. One of the other options for today involved the plagues of Egypt, which I've always felt uncomfortable with. But in contrast, this passage from Hebrews is a wonderful passage, and it led me to do a quick bit of research into Hebrews using that most serious of academic research tools, Wikipedia, a tool which is beloved of all students and lawyers. And from Wikipedia, you learn that whilst the book of Hebrews was sometimes attributed to St. Paul, many, even as early as the 1st century, questioned that, and his authors now said to be unknown. And I admit it does have a different feel to books of the Bible that we know were written by Paul. But why believe me when you've got the Wikipedia tool, which tells you that, quote, scholars of Hebrew consider the writing in Hebrews to be more polished and eloquent than any other book of the New Testament, and also that the very carefully composed and studied Greek of Hebrews is not Paul's spontaneous, volatile and contextual Greek. But whatever its authorship, Wikipedia concludes that Hebrews has earned the reputation of being a masterpiece. So it's setting the bar quite high. So it'll be interesting to see what you make of the reading. And let's say it's Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 to 31. And I'm reading from the NIV version. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from their death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. And by faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. So this is wonderful writing, and the constant refrain of by faith, showing how people can, by faith, achieve the most astonishing, the most seemingly impossible things. But what's actually going on here? Well, the writer of Hebrews, whoever he was concerned that many Jews had begun to doubt whether Jesus really could be the Messiah for whom they had waited for so long. This wasn't the great leader they had expected who would free them from the Romans and their harsh rule. Instead, it was someone who was preaching peace and reconciliation, to turn the other cheek, whilst all the time his followers were being persecuted. But in this passage, the writer takes the readers back to the great figures of the Old Testament and the faith and trust that those figures had had in God's plan, even when the time seemed toughest and the task the hardest, and how that faith and trust had been rewarded. How could a sea part? How could the great wars of a city fall? Well, they did, and they did by reason of faith. And in the next chapter of Hebrews, the writer goes on to say where this faith can bring us. By this faith, the writer tells us, God's people will not meet the somewhat terrifying God of the Old Testament, the God of the plagues of Egypt, the God who, the writer says, spoke words that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken because they could not bear what was being commanded, the God the sight of whom was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. Instead, through what the writer calls Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, those who have faith will arrive instead at what the writer says is a heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God, with thousands of angels in joyful assembly. So it's a covenant, it's a promise, which is worth having faith in. Amen.